what's happening, gang. Jeff, bringing it in the stash, live and hot. I didn't know you were going to come correct like that, man. Good to see you. Jeff, engineer, holding it down. And thank you guys for riding with us on the stash right now. We got your 11 o'clock hour, and we're hanging out with Kevin Cadora, owner of Fair Cadora Family Law. He and his wife over there, they do divorce a little bit differently. And you are a breath of fresh air, my man. If your wife was here, I would share that with her as well. But your approach is a welcomed one for folks like me who are helping, people, unfortunately, fish out of problems a little bit further downstream than what we would like. And it's because of your collaborative efforts to try to make sure that this whole concept of family values and cooperation doesn't end up manifesting in litigation unless it absolutely has to, like as a last resort. And I love the concepts that you threw out there in the last segment. But we're going to kind of get now into the weeds a little bit. The concept of peace of mind is something that I think it's undervalued in this conversation, does it not?
Absolutely.
And I want to set you up here with a little personal experience. So, in the process of helping folks buy and sell homes here, unfortunately we have problems that we have to have, folks like you get involved with as well. And most recently, we had a situation where there's an easement on a property, and I'm not going to get into the weeds, but basically my seller and the owner next door have been fighting it out over this ridiculous thing for over a month. Pissed off, exhausted, like just you name it, like horrible. And then finally he called an attorney, and all the attorney did was looked at one document on one piece of paper, and it was done. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think you guys get kind of the bad rap of having it always be the other way around, where it could be really easy and simple and you guys make it really complicated and expensive. Well, not always the case, right? And what comes up for me is I always see that old broken down van parked around town about the fast divorce. Yep. Like, can we blow that up finally? What's that all about? I
have no idea. And I often tell clients that nothing will cost more than a cheap attorney who doesn't know what they're doing. And I'm not saying that attorney does anything wrong. I'm just saying
we don't even know who that is. It's not a referendum on him.
Exactly.
Right.
But going back to what you were mentioning with regards to peace of mind, from a personal experience, I've done divorce on both sides of the fence here. I've done it as an attorney, and I've been involved with my own divorce.
Okay, fair enough.
And I had to hire my own attorney, and I do this for a living. Been doing it for 12 years. I know the ins and outs of it. I know how judges rule. I know the law. But I mean, it is so overwhelming from an emotional standpoint that I couldn't focus on my career. I couldn't focus on my kids. I couldn't focus on my quality of life. I was so focused on the divorce that I had to hire my own attorney. And, I had to pay some money, but it gave me a peace of mind that allowed me to focus on what was really important to me, which was my career and my family. So that's what we as attorneys, as competent, good attorneys, will provide clients.
Good setup. But now let's knock them down a little bit. Now, you'd mentioned complex issues and stuff involved. Give me some examples. Like what makes a breakup complex?
Typically, it's property issues, but it can also involve custody and domestic violence issues. But with regards to the financials, when there is a business involved, when there's a self-employed individual, experts have to come in and they have to value the business, which can be very expensive because, of course, the business owner is going to say it's worth nothing and the outed spouse is going to say it's worth $1 million. So you need to have an objective third party come in and value that. And that can be expensive. It can be complicated. Typically, attorneys don't do that. When there's someone who's self-employed, you need to do an income available for support analysis, which also involves an expert. If one party is not working, you may have to do a vocational evaluation. When there's high conflict custody disputes, when parents just can't get along, they have to parallel parent. They can't co-parent. Typically, there needs to be a custody evaluation involved. If there's domestic violence, when one spouse is abusive towards the children or the other spouse, then it's really important that someone has good representation in their corner who knows what they're doing. Otherwise, people are just going to spin their wheels. So business obviously being one of them. And in San Diego County, I'm sure we come up with this quite a bit just because there's such an entrepreneurial spirit and thread here, the opportunity of people to have their own businesses when in the situation. And that's not even to mention the fact that usually when you own your own business, you're really married to your business. So probably a higher likelihood of those guys end up at your office in divorce, but that'll be maybe a completely separate show we'll talk about.
But the concept was recently introduced to me about what's called a high conflict custody. So what's that all about?
That's like I mentioned before, when parents absolutely cannot co-parent.
Okay.
Maybe there is a situation where one parent is engaged in infidelity and the other parent is completely distraught, rightfully so, and will prohibit visitation with the children, or doesn't involve the other parent with decision-making regarding the children.
So like using power... Like using the kid basically as a power
as a
tool or whatever,
as a pawn in the game. They use them as messengers. They talk to them about adult issues. And like I said before, children are so heavily impacted by divorce, but when you start engaging in that type of behavior, children begin acting out. They start using drugs. They start skipping school. So it's very important that you have a good attorney who can say, put the kids into therapy. Stop with that type of communication, because if you have a bad attorney, they're not going to do anything or say anything, and that really just impacts the kids.
Yeah, kids, by the way, don't do that. Don't go use drugs, and there's actually help out there. And maybe that's something you could talk about a little bit, too, is you had mentioned earlier in the last segment about being one who operates under the spirit of cooperation and family values. What kind of programs are available for the kids going through divorce?
There's a lot of volunteer programs through the county. There's Kids Term, which is actually something that the kids and the parents can, it's a program for co-parenting and children going through divorce. That's Kids Turn and Parents Turn. There are several programs that I am engaged in throughout the county, one of which is the Children at Risk program, which is where I go around and I actually do a mock trial for fifth graders, and they act as jurors. It's actually a presentation that's done on the TV, and they get to look at all the evidence, and they get to look at a trial, and they get to see how things work. And
like a divorce trial, or?
It's actually a criminal trial.
It's a criminal trial, okay.
And it's something that I do. It's one of the volunteer things that I do. But as far as children and programs available for children, really the parents have to look into doing things for like extracurricular activities, sports and music and things of that nature, to basically keep stability in the home, because a lot of parents, they get so overwhelmed with the situation, they forget about keeping the status quo within the home for the kids.
Yeah, and that, I mean, listen, I don't want to speak on behalf of, I'm not a spokesperson by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems like most parents, when they're splitting up, they say to themselves, you know what, we're done, but... And then the but is always about, the kids, and the reason why they're doing all this stuff is for the kids. And unfortunately, it seems like the kids are the first things that are forgot.
Absolutely.
The parents become very selfish, and they just make the whole thing about this push and pull between them and them and them. And then next thing you know, the real victim, so to speak, are the kids being displaced. So I love that thought. And I love what you're doing, too. That's great. That's great news.
Yeah, and I also advise clients, to get into therapy themselves. Go to a therapist to talk about the issues rather than the children. Go to a gym. Go to yoga. Go get a massage. Don't do anything that's destructive, just constructive. And a lot of clients, they take that advice, and it actually makes the situation a lot better.
You can imagine that. So what about real property? I mean, obviously, this is really what it comes down to, right? So if you got a business, got it. If you're not getting along, obviously, there's a whole thread on that. But what about the concept of I own a house?
Very complicated, especially if the house was purchased before marriage, and there is what's called separate property interest.
Say more about that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated, what's called a Moore-Marsden apportionment. That's what we use as attorneys to determine what the separate property and the community property interest is in a home that is purchased before marriage. And it really depends on how much money was put into it before marriage, the principal pay down, the appreciation over the course of the marriage. And our firm typically hires an expert to come in and actually do that analysis and provide a report. So that can be somewhat complicated. If there's separate property contributions made to a community home during the marriage, say from an inheritance or a gift from a parent, then there has to be a reimbursement at the end during the divorce. And also, real property is very important to attorneys, because as family law attorneys, we can put what are called family law real property liens against the property in order to get paid, which can range between $60,000 and $100,000, depending on how contentious the divorce is. So
like, somebody try to put that in a layperson. So, like, let's say there's some kind of ruling or whatever that happens as a construct of the divorce, but someone's not willing to actually appropriate the fund. So then it actually just becomes a lien on the real property?
Absolutely. And it's actually, they sign a deed of trust, and there's a lien that is filed with the county recorder's office. It says exactly how much is owed to the attorney, and that's how we get paid. So it can create conflicts of interest between clients and attorneys, because the attorney has actually acquired an interest in a piece of property belonging to the client. So if the client doesn't want to give that up, it can create conflicts of interest, which are very complicated to sort out. But haven't had that happen just yet.
Well, and that's a good thing. And so, I think, the concept of why you are needed is something that I wanted to kick this conversation off with, because of my recent experience. Literally, it's happening right now, about how much good somebody like who does what you do in your profession can provide to peace of mind of a situation and really make things more efficient. And it's not one size fits all, because that old adage or that joke we talked about the lawyers are the only ones that ever win inside of a conflict, or what was the Danny DeVito quote? There
are no winners or losers in family law, only degrees of losing.
Only degrees of losing, right. That's obviously on the other side of choosing poorly, perhaps you might say, in the first place. And so a client can still focus on their family, their career, and really, their life, right? I mean, the opportunity of going through this tough situation, but maintaining with what of it you still can. You need some help to be able to get there, do you not?
Absolutely. I mean, there are certain cases where you don't need an attorney. I mean, if it's a very short-term marriage, maybe you went to Vegas and made a mistake, and it's a month marriage, no children, no assets, no debts.
Yeah.
If the parties are amicable and they can come to an agreement, there's actually services that are provided to help them get through it.
But for the rest of us, we probably need some Kevin Cadora.
Something like that, yes.
So we can catch him, by the way. If you want something that is not the old adage of, oh my God, this is going to be the worst experience of my life. And as I love how you coined the phrase, divorce done differently. It's almost kind of like a spa-like experience when you come over there, right? It's calm, it's relaxed, and the whole spirit is around one of cooperation and injecting your family values. That's my man, Kevin Cadora. You can catch him, by the way, at faircadora.com. Coming up, we're going to get down a little deeper into this whole thing. I know no one wants to talk about prenups. I know no one wants to talk about postnups or domestic violence restraining orders. But, man, we got to do this, and that's why I got you live in the house right now. So, Kevin, thank you for sticking around. Thanks for sticking around in the stash. We'll be right back. Real Talk Radio San Diego.